dramatic fall of Bashar al-Assad, once a seemingly unshakable dictator in Syria, sends a powerful message to African leaders who view power as their birthright. The collapse of his tyrannical regime highlights the dangers of clinging to power at all costs. So how striking are the parallels between Assad's rule and African autocrats? Well, let's speak now to the African Affairs analyst, Professor Tunde Esan, who is a professor of international relations with a focus on the history of African relations and democratic developments on the continent and beyond. And Professor Esan joins me now in the studio. Lovely to see you again.
It's good to see you, Charles.
What's your reading of the dramatic ousting of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and whether there might be signs or lessons there for Africa?
Yeah, dramatic, as you said, actually sudden, unexpected, and it was just like, okay, what's going on there? Within 7 days, the young men of HTS were in Damascus, and Bashar al-Assad fled. And as of yesterday, we heard that he is in Moscow, in Russia. So apparently, that is quite interesting. That is very dramatic. That is quite historical when you look at the history of nations. And it holds a lot of lessons for nations, not only in Africa, but other parts of the world. No wonder it's been at the top of the news in every country for the past few days.
So there is a message there for African leaders, particularly those who view power as something of a birthright. I mean, how much does it speak to tyrannical regimes that, you know, Africa has a history of, that prioritize personal gain over their people's welfare?
Let me make reference to two African countries, Cameroon and Uganda. Cameroon, since independence, has only had two heads of state. A nation that gained independence in 1962 has only had two heads of state. Shocking, isn't it? You understand? 1960 or thereabout. And that's Amadou Ahidjo, who was technically overthrown in 1982, you know, succeeded by Paul Biya. Between 1982 and today is 42 years, and Paul Biya has been in Cameroon as the head of state, you understand?
Yeah.
You have had elections upon elections, and complaints upon complaints. I mean, a fairly huge country, strategic when it comes to African economy, and strategically located, bordering both West Africa and the Central Africa. That country is of importance to a lot of people, international relations experts, historians, and lovers of Africa all over the world. But interestingly, the democratic credentials is quite questionable. So that is one. Then you go to Uganda, you understand, and since 1986, you know, Yoweri Museveni has been in power. Interestingly, his national resistance movement came into power on the wave of popularity, you know, succeeding years of disdain for autocratic rule, starting from Idi Amin, you know, starting from Idi Amin, who himself overthrew the president, you understand, Obote, President Obote, you understand, who was their president and the prime minister at independence. And you would think that since 1986, that a maximum of 5-10 years, that they will have had a transition and had a very good transitional government, I mean, a very good democratic credentials, but it has been questionable. Since 1986 to date, is almost 40 years. Yoweri Museveni is still there consolidating powers, entrenching himself,
and the problem,
and sending signals to other parts of the world that this is not, you know, the Africa you think of. This is what it is here. Indeed,
and the problem with people like that, and I mean, other people come to mind, Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire and so on. The problem with them is that they try to convince the world that they are there because of their popularity, when most times they rig elections to keep themselves in office. But they try to say, hey, the people have decided that they're going to change the constitution because they love me so much that every election cycle they vote me back into power. I mean, that's part of the deception, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Every autocratic ruler, every despot every questionable character it has a questionable, in quotes, reasons for them to actually explain their position. So it is not unusual that Paul Biya and his allies in Cameroon has not seen anything wrong. Paul Biya is above 90 years, and Yoweri Museveni to be 79 this year, thereabout. And so they will always have a reason. There must be a reason, you know. Sit-tight rulers have a reason. It's either they are thinking that, okay, if they are not there, the country will go, you understand?
Will fall apart.
Fall apart. Or if they shift positions, the opposition will take over. And, you know, there are always reasons. And mostly, they cash on the ethnic, you know, divides, you understand, and divisions in the country. And, of course, suspicions and all that. But this happens mostly, but particularly, in some cases, even when the ethnic, we don't have multi-ethnic groups, but when despots take over, they always have a reason.
So there are parallels between Assad's rule and the actions of these African autocrats, because even though they claim that they are loved by the people, and that's why they're coming in, you would think that in that context, if they're that popular, they'd just let, you know, elections go and let freedom of speech prevail. But those people always make an extra effort to silence dissent. Of course, in addition to amassing, you know, personal wealth to the detriment of their countries.
Yes, of course. It is not only despots that have been ruling for a long time. In some of the African countries where you have heads of state, you understand, who love power, who love wealth, who love everything that goes with it, you understand. Corruption still reigns, you know, and you have corrupt practices all over the place. In the Good Governance Index by World Bank, Uganda is one of the, you know, it's ranked one of the worst 10 or 12 in the world. So it is synonymous with such rules, but that is not the only one that it happens to. It happens even where you have fairly democratic, you understand, and organized systems in some of the countries. But it's worse when you have autocratic system, because they must entrench themselves, they must stay put, and if they must stay put, some people must actually be compromised, basically. You understand, in order to support them. That's what happens.
And that allure of dictatorship and that false sense of permanence and control that it gives, one of the lessons from Assad's fall is that far from being permanent, I mean, Assad, his family were there for 50 odd years. Far from being permanent, it is in fact very fragile. And when the tide turns, there'll essentially be no refuge, will there?
Power is fleeting. Most people don't know this. Just like human being, nobody lives forever. Understand? Assad's father died in 2000, year 2000. So Assad, a young man, you understand? You know, a doctor came in, you know, like any other person. He saw an opportunity to entrench himself, and he has been there for 24 years. Before then, his father was there for 29 years, you understand? And for a lot of people, Syria is very, very important. For us in Africa, it is very critical and important when you look at Syria. Syria, you know, you have Damascus, one of the longest lived and the consistently inhabited city in the history of mankind. You understand? Everybody, one way or the other, almost every religion has something to refer to when it comes to Damascus. You understand? So there's this historical link that is there. And what it means basically is that for the Northern Africa, for North Africa, there have been generations of people who originally came from Syria. Understand? Not only that, Syria is very strategic when it comes to power play and you know, strong power equations in the international relations. So it's very, very important, particularly in the Middle East. And when you're talking about the Middle East, of course, there will be fallout in North Africa.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And so basically, the people will tolerate
Yeah.
or appear to tolerate tyranny for some time,
Yeah.
and that's a warning to to African leaders.
Yes.
But they'll appear to tolerate tyranny for some time, but eventually that human desire for freedom and justice will eventually prevail.
Of course.
Right.
You can't rule that out. It is natural that man wants to be free. You understand? For generations of people, they have never heard of any other name apart from Paul Biya. But don't take it for granted that the younger generation are actually reading. They know exactly what is happening in Syria. The fallout might not be immediate, but it is the nature of mankind to look at history and see, look, what exactly is right. That is why you see Syrians all over the world jubilating, from Berlin to London, from Moscow, everywhere. And of course, that's a strong lesson to African leaders who might want to say, look, who are saying, and who might want to say, I want to stay there for as long as I can.
So what would you say to them now? What's your advice? I mean, it's not your place, I suppose, to start telling them what to do or whatever, but I mean, generally speaking, given this analysis that you've given us, I mean, what should they do?
Say something about the fall of al-Assad, you know, that is very interesting. Many of these rulers and regimes in Africa have strong ties with Moscow, you understand? And the strong power equations and projections of Russia is partly because of their base in Tartus, you know, port city of Tartus in Syria, where they have their biggest naval base, and even equally in Syria,
an air base
where they have their military base in Kamemi, you understand? So what it means basically is that whoever Russia is supporting in Africa know that it is just a matter of few hours before Russian power and the Russian military might is made real in their capital with whoever or against whoever opposes them. But that is not going to happen in the next few. That is already obvious because of the new regime. That is why you saw it yesterday, that even though for a long time Putin and Moscow has been supporting al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, you know, opposition flag was hoisted in Moscow. What it means basically, what does it mean for Africa? What it means is that even the strong power equations that favors you today might not favor you tomorrow.
Indeed.
You understand? And that the rising of people can only be suppressed for some time, but never forever. So it's very, very important.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah,
I appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to us about that. Professor Tunde Esan is an African affairs analyst, a professor of international relations with a focus on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent and beyond. Thank you very much indeed.